Welcome to the world of culture pop with Steve Mason and Sue Kalinsky. Culture, comedy, movies, TV, tech, authors, trends, pop. This is the Culture Pop Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 37 of the Culture Pop Podcast with Sue Kalinsky. I'm Steve Mason, brought to you by the law offices of Jacob and Ronnie. Sue, you want to make the joke that you made just a minute ago when we started to record this?
Why would I do it again if you wanted to re-record it?
I thought it fell flat, but try it again. It's episode 37.
You can't go back. You can't go back. I'm not going to go into your... I'm not going to fall into your little trap, okay. And then you'll make fun of me for making the joke again. So... I know how this works.
You know me way too well. Way too well. All right. The movie Run This Town premiered at last year's South by Southwest Film Festival. It stars Ben Platt, Mina Massoud, Nina Dobrev, Damian Lewis, and it tells the story of former Toronto Mayor Rob Ford. It is produced, written, and directed by Ricky Tollman, and he joins us now. Ricky, thanks so much for doing this.
Of course. I'm happy to do it.
So, great movie. Amazing, especially as a first feature, following three millennials as they become entangled in the life of Toronto Mayor Rob Ford. You're a young guy, first feature. How were you able to get this project off the ground?
I mean, it took a while. I had been interning for a producer, Randy Manis, who eventually became my producing partner. And during that time, I had said to him, I want to direct this movie from a script that I wrote. And I showed him the script. And I was just fortunate that he was incredibly loyal and helpful and didn't laugh in my face when I showed it to him. And from there, we just started putting the pieces together. And it was really once we started to attach cast that things started to galvanize and come together. And I'm fortunate that I'm Canadian, so I was able to get, in terms of the financing, quite a bit of it through the Canadian system from Telefilm Canada, which is the Canadian government's cultural entity for financing film and television, and through tax credits, and then we were able to find investors that believed in the project as much as we did and the cast did. So, it took a while, but it came together relatively smoothly. There were no major obstacles once cast really started coming together.
So you're Canadian. Did you grow up in Toronto?
Yeah. I did. I was born in Johannesburg in South Africa, but I moved to Toronto when I was a kid. So I consider myself a Torontonian.
So I want to kind of lay the groundwork for this. We know Rob Ford as the mayor who smoked crack, right? That's what we knew here. But describe who he was and how did this crazy, populist, racist guy get elected in the first place?
I think it's a situation that people didn't really expect to happen. This was back in the early part of the 2010s, in 2010, actually. And when the election was happening and the campaign was going on, nobody expected that Rob would eventually get elected. And it was on election night, as the results started coming in, that people were shocked that lived in Toronto proper. But the people that lived in the outskirt areas of the city weren't surprised at all, because they felt like they had been heard and listened to by somebody that hadn't ignored them. So I think the situation was sort of the first of its kind as we've seen over the past few years, over the subsequent years of the 2010s, of this great shift to the political right, where we saw people appealing to the basest instincts of electorates around the world. So when Rob was very heavily featured in the news around the world, it was played as a joke. And for the people in the city, it wasn't really a joke. I mean, there were social programs that were being gutted, and there was just this really dark rhetoric that people were embracing. And sure, there were silly videos of Rob Ford bumping into television cameras and fumbling down the street, but I think if that were to happen today, it would be taken a little more seriously.
As someone who lived, in Toronto when this was happening, and Toronto is, fairly, liberal city. Who was the mayor before him, and what were your feelings about that mayor?
The mayor was a guy named David Miller, who he was a moderate liberal. There was nothing to like or dislike about David Miller. He was a good guy. I don't know that he made any great changes to the city. He kept running. So there was certainly no bad news. There was no strange news on late night shows around the world about that mayor. And I think he, like other mayors, very much appealed to a broad base within Toronto proper. And that had been happening for many, many years through David Miller's mayorship and the mayors that had run the city before him. So when Rob started appealing to people outside of the city, they felt like, oh, this guy hears us, he understands us.
So you tell this story from the perspective of kind of boiling it down to three millennials. How important was that to your story? And why was that important to you?
When I originally started writing this story, it was about a group of young people in the city. And it was only, I'd say later on in the development process that I decided to marry that story with the story of Rob Ford's scandal, because I was deep into writing the script around the time that Donald Trump announced his candidacy for nomination of the Republican Party. And people laughed at that. They thought that wasn't serious. This was all just a publicity stunt. And sitting here in Toronto, it felt like, oh, I've seen this before, and I've seen this reaction before. And as a young person in the city that relies on arts infrastructure and this doesn't relate to Trump, but just things like the subways and things that are being gutted in favor of cars in 2010. That isn't helpful for the environment, and it's not helpful for a generation that's going to have to fix those problems when the current crop of politicians are long gone. So I thought it was important to bring in the political aspect of the story around that time. And I thought that Rob was an interesting way to look at it because I saw so many similarities between Rob and Donald Trump and things that were happening around the world. I mean, in the UK, Boris Johnson at the time was a figure that was the mayor of London, and later on, Marine Le Pen was running for to lead France, and all these people were running on the same base instinct of humans that Rob was. I think looking at it through the lens of young people that are going to be affected by policy for a very long time wasn't difficult for me because I am one of those people, and I think about that constantly and all the time. And certainly there are articles and news articles about this generation and how they are lazy and entitled. And if you go back 20 years and 40 years and 60 years, the same things were written about every other generation. But I think with the internet and Twitter and things getting passed around so easily that people are very easily scapegoated. And I wanted to look at my friends and peers in a way that I wasn't looking at them through rose-colored glasses, but I certainly wanted to give them an opportunity to speak for themselves. I thought, every generation had touchstone film about the people seeing themselves on screen. There's The Breakfast Club or Rebel Without a Cause or Easy Rider. And I remember having a conversation with my friends where I said, what's our generation's movie? Like, where do we see ourselves reflected? And somebody was like, well, I guess it's like The Hunger Games. Like, maybe, but that's not really us on screen. Maybe like the situation feels like it, but it's odd that we haven't had a film that we're depicted in a way where we're not being made fun of or at all, really. So I wanted to tell this story about people that I knew in a way that I hoped was honest.
So these characters who worked in the administration and the young journalist who worked at the local paper, these are based on people that were in your circle?
Yes. The character played by Ben Platt-Graham worked in the newsroom at a crumbling newspaper, and my older brother had studied journalism, thought he was going to be a great journalist, wanted to be a real journalist that could dive into a story and analyze it and investigate it for months and have something break. But by the time he got a job in the industry, he was updating the lower thirds of a 24-hour news station, boiling down wire news stories into 10 words or less, and that wasn't what he expected to be doing when he got into journalism. And he stuck it out for 2 or 3 years doing that, and then he was laid off in a massive layoff of 200 people from this organization. And the Ashley character played by Nina Dobrev is a young lawyer who hasn't been able to get a job at a firm but needs to take a job somewhere in order to pay off her student debt, is heavily informed by the experiences of one of my closest friends that I grew up with. And the character of Kamal, this young immigrant who probably didn't really have any natural interest in politics, found himself in a pretty high-level job by chance because he needed also to help support his family. Though I'm not a person of color, being an immigrant heavily informed how Kamal viewed the world for me. This is something also that Mina Massoud, that plays Kamal, and I spoke about quite often. because Mina was born in Egypt and moved to Toronto as a kid, was that as a child of immigrants, you have far more weight and stress on your shoulders than your peers that are natural born citizens of where you are, just because it's not just your own stress and concern for the future. It's, you have to live up to these expectations that your parents, who uprooted their entire lives to bring you to a new country so that you could live out your dreams. I mean, my parents uprooted their lives in order for my brothers and I to have stuff that they didn't. And I think that is, it's a heavy burden to carry. And I think that's something that Kamal is constantly thinking about in the film, is just his family and the hopes and dreams that they had for him and how he can live up to those.
You know, I have, on my radio show and in my life, I've often said I think that millennials get a really bad rap. I mean, if you read about this generation, it's a very values-based generation, a generation that is very concerned about the future and devoted those ideas. It's a generation that cares more about doing the right thing than making the most money. The Ben Platt character, Bram Schreiber, is an idealist, and he's on this journalistic crusade. The other two characters are interesting to me. Ashley, who's played by Nina Dobrev, and Kamal, who's played by Mina Massoud, because they've got to compromise. In both their cases, Kamal knows that Mayor Rob Ford is not a good mayor and is completely off the rails. And Nina, Ashley obviously has the incident with Rob Ford, but they don't really have any other options but to consider staying in those roles, right?
Yeah. I mean, for the character of Ashley, as I mentioned, it's heavily based on my friend's experiences, who studied law, got a job, and it wasn't the job that she wanted, but it was the only one that she could get at the time. And she needed to pay off student debt and to pay her rent. And her boss would, she would, not to the extent that Ashley experienced actual harassment at the office. Her boss would touch her inappropriately, and he would ask her to wear clothes that were more form-fitting at the office. And one day she showed up at her office, and he said, "I have a surprise for you." And she walked into the office, and there was a woman sitting there, and he says, "Hey, this is your stylist. She's going to take you out shopping today and to get a makeover." And I thought that, it's crazy that this was must have been 2016, that a woman that studied law, is a professional, gets a job at a law firm in an area that she is not interested in, comes in to an office with 12 other male colleagues, and she is told to go take the day off to go shopping, was crazy to me.
Yep.
And I couldn't imagine that happening to any of my male friends. So it was, and she went along, she got her makeover, and I remember she was so upset by this, but she couldn't find another job, and she had bills to pay. So it was a compromise that she had to make, and she always points to people saying things like, "Well, why didn't that woman say anything at the time when it happened?" And she was like, "Well, I know why they didn't say anything when it happened, because there are things that you can't control." And that was just the decision she had to make in order to survive. I think the same thing happens with the Kamal character in that, you know, he has to make moral compromises and decisions and stuff that's probably going to weigh heavily on him for a long time in order to just keep the wheels running for himself and his grandmother.
So your friend, who the character is based on, after this whole demise with Rob Ford, what happened to her? What did she do in her career? Did she continue being a lawyer?
Yeah, she did. She eventually found a job somewhere that she enjoys and she feels valued. So she's okay.
So you've got such a great cast in this film. Ben Platt, obviously, Tony winner, Grammy winner, Damian Lewis, Golden Globe winner, Jennifer Ely, two-time Tony winner. Mina Massoud is great, played Aladdin. Such a great cast. How did Damian Lewis come on board? And talk about the process that he had to go through in terms of prosthetics to play Rob Ford.
We were on a very quick shoot schedule. We were 20 days.
Wow.
So Rob's, you feel his character throughout the movie, but he's really not featured in the film for that long. So Damien was only on set for 2 days. And he joined us, he signed on 4 weeks before we went into production, which was incredibly tight considering we had to create prosthetics and he had to figure out who this guy is and get into his head. I was lucky that his agent sent him the script. He read it, and 2 days after his agent had sent him the script, I was on the phone with him. And I think he very much associated Rob with the silliness that people around the world associated him with. But after reading the script, he really saw the parallels with Trump and Boris Johnson. So I don't want to speak for him, but I think he thought there was something interesting to play here in terms of a person in power that can really use their charm for good and doesn't. Getting Damien was important to me because I didn't want to have somebody that is just goofy. And Damien is somebody who you see him on screen and within a 10-second moment, he could be charming, funny, scary, and belligerent. So to shift between those things and not know entirely how you're supposed to feel about somebody is important to the character. I think Rob was charming. That's why he won, is because people liked him. He was a likable guy who made bad decisions and probably should have never gone into politics, but his family was a political family. His father was a very well-respected politician in Toronto. And I think, like our younger characters, he had that familial pressure weighing upon him as well. So I think Damien saw that as an interesting aspect to play. And everyone else, everyone read the script and got what we were trying to do. So it was just, we were all on the same page, and it was a pleasure because by the time we were all on set, everybody got the tone, they got what this was, and there was a lot to do every day. So there was very little discussion that had to take place because we were all on the same page from the start.
Well, listen, it's a fascinating movie. It's very much about a generation that has, as we talked about, has sort of a bad rap. And I thought you captured that generation really well. The movie is called Run This Town. Opens Friday, March 7th in theaters on demand from Elevation Pictures and Oscilloscope. Hey, Ricky, congratulations on the movie. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Accident or injury, call Jacob and Ronnie. Call Jacob.
Hey, it's Mace. If you or a loved one is injured in any kind of accident, please don't wait. Call Jacob immediately for a free consultation. That's right, free. When an accident happens, it can turn your world upside down, so put the best on your side. Jacob doesn't even get paid unless you win. First name, first thought, first call, Jacob, Jacob, Jacob. After an accident, 24 hours a day, call 844-24-JACOB or visit calljacob.com.
Call Jacob.
I appreciate Ricky doing that. I started watching the movie and I had no idea that it was the mayor who smoked crack that the movie was actually about. And I knew there was a mayor that smoked crack. I had no idea where he was.
Well, nowadays it's like, what mayor doesn't?
Right. Well, I didn't read anything I try not to read anything about the movie. Like, I don't want to know reviews and I don't want to know the synopsis or anything before I start watching. So, for example, I didn't even know that was Damian Lewis playing Rob Ford in the first place. And afterwards, I'm like, where did they find a guy that fat who would smoke crack so convincingly?
Well, you knew so much of it was prosthetics.
Yeah, there was a lot of prosthetics. Yeah, no question.
But I knew that it had to have been Damian Lewis because I obviously I knew that he was in the film and that was the only character he could have been.
Unless he was really a chameleon.
Exactly.
Unless he was playing a millennial.
Right.
I thought really interesting movie. I do think millennials get a bad rap.
Oh no, you've talked about it a lot.
Yeah, you're one of those bag on the millennials people.
I don't bag the millennials. I work with millennials. They work really hard.
They do work hard.
Yeah.
And I was serious about that. If you look at all the surveys and the polling, millennials care more about doing the right thing than they do about making a lot of money.
I want to tell you something.
Which is unfortunate because they've got so much debt that the money would be really helpful.
I have to tell you something. I work in an environment where I'm usually the oldest person in the building,
This is that environment too.
Exactly. So here I am. And it's the truth. So I work in an office where sometimes I can't figure out certain things.
Yeah.
Like, we just got this new phone system at work. It's kind of like the real office. Nobody knows how to work the phones. It is just so comical to the point where we get emails periodically within the last couple of weeks that they're actually holding a class to teach us how to use the phones. But when I don't know how to do something, who comes to my rescue? A millennial.
A millennial. It's just to continue on that theme. So while you were trying to download this movie to watch,
yes,
I get a text message from you saying, I don't know how to fucking do this.
Oh, Alan, who books the show. I'm sending him screenshots of what came up on my computer. Like, I am so frustrated. I just got home from work. I had a long day, and I have to watch this movie tonight.
You and my mom have the same handle on technology. You know how to use Facebook, and that's about it.
That's not true.
Sue, thank you very much. Fun as always. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, and we'll see you next week.
Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. We'll see you next week for an all-new episode of Culture Pop.